You're listening to Crime Scene Today. I'm your host, Dan Zentek. We talk about issues, current and future, facing law enforcement, crime scene, and forensic investigations. Today, we have the Special Victims Unit from Montgomery County here to talk about Children's Safe Harbor and talk about some of the issues and how the multidisciplinary process works. But before we get to that, just a reminder, the Crimes Against Children Conference is virtual this year, and they have a scholarship program that if you apply, which is due by this Friday, for free registration. If your agency has trouble affording sending you to those type of training, then you can apply by this Friday as the deadline for you to go to Crimes Against Children, which is normally a huge conference in Dallas that people come from all over the nation, all over the world for these presenters. This year it's still going to be virtual. Hopefully next year we'll be able to meet in person for that networking event. Also, early bird deadline for the Texas division of the IAI is on May 1st. So if you plan on going to that, it's going to be in Frisco this year for our crime scene investigators and dealing with forensics. So make sure that you sign up for that. That saves you or your department $100 for attending that if you sign up by then. So in the studio today, we have Detective Robert Espinosa, Sergeant Todd Hoff, and Prosecutor Shanna Redwine. So thank y'all for coming in. Normally, and in the past, we've had Victoria here, and we've had Carrie here and to speak about Safe Harbor and all the great things they do. And I know that we wanted to make sure to have this conversation with it being Child Abuse Awareness Month, and I know y'all have already done some things around the county. There have been some articles in our local Conroe Courier in reference to some of the forensic interviewers and some fundraising projects, things that we'll talk about later on. So again, thank y'all for coming in, and Shannon, if you sort of want to kick us off, because you're on the board for Children's Safe Harbor, and if I know some people, we refer to it as Children's Safe Harbor, but a lot of places it's just the Child Advocacy Center, right? That's the normal term that's used around the nation. If you could give us sort of an insight into what the multidisciplinary, what the reason behind a CAC is.
Sure. So, when we talk about a CAC, that's a Children's Advocacy Center, and that's a network of centers throughout the state of Texas, organized by CAC Texas, and our local Children's Advocacy Center is Children's Safe Harbor. And really what Safe Harbor is for the MDT process, they're the heart of our MDT. So in addition to their function of conducting forensic interviews for children who have suffered abuse or neglect or who are at risk of abuse or neglect, to providing counseling services for those children and providing family advocacy services, Children's Safe Harbor also helps organize our local multidisciplinary team. And when we talk about a multidisciplinary team, that is a team of prosecutorial agencies, of law enforcement, child protective services, medical personnel within the field, and advocates and victim coordinators that come together, and we share information. We conduct parallel investigations, and we coordinate with one another to make sure that when a case is reported either to law enforcement or to CPS, that we are all seeing those kiddos, that we are talking to one another, that there's not information loss in the process. It's essentially, I think of it kind of like safety nets, right? We set up all these safety nets, one underneath the other, to make sure that we don't have kiddos falling through the cracks. And so with communication and coordination between all of our different agencies, that's really how we're able to do that.
Well, and also, I mean, I know in the beginning, and when I say beginning, it was really not that long ago. One of the reasons it was created was to have expertise in those areas because, let's face it, let's go, 15 years back even, that officers were on scene interviewing the children, right? And so you had a police officer that they went to the academy, they learned the basics of that, they went through FTO, they knew how to do those, but they didn't have the training in specialized crime and investigation. They would go to a sexual assault of a 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, and that officer would sit down and, do the best they could, right?
Sure.
They were trying to do their job and try to interview this person, and then they would take that, and then the child would need to be interviewed by the prosecutors, and then they need to be interviewed by the SANE, and all these different things, right? So I know that was one of the initial focuses in trying to create these centers so that the child didn't have to tell this story over and over and over. And so now they come there, and that's where they go to the forensic interviewer, right?
Right.
So I guess to start with that process, heaven forbid that, someone has a child that does this. that has something happen to them, but what sort of happens when they come to Safe Harbor? I mean, what happens, like, what's the process, right?
Sure. Yeah, ideally, right, they have to talk once and we all listen instead of having to talk over and over to each of us. From the prosecutorial side, if we have prosecutors assigned to Safe Harbor with our detectives, and anytime we can, when a child comes into Safe Harbor, they're going to be met with a family advocate in a safe environment, in a child-friendly environment. And if they're there for a forensic interview, they will then be brought back. They will meet the forensic interviewer. They will have some kind of ice-breaking time. And then that professional trained interviewer will interview that child. And law enforcement is able to observe, prosecutors, CPS are able to observe that interview without the child seeing, right? It's kind of
Right, so an interview room, they're separate in another
correct.
place.
An interview in an observation room. And then from there, based on what we learned in the forensic interview, we can each begin our investigations, begin concurrent investigations, and working together to make sure that child's safe. Following the interview, that child and their family will be referred for counseling services, which are provided by Children's Safe Harbor. And then there's also family advocacy services. So if that family is experiencing financial hardship, housing hardship, things of that nature, there are family advocacy services that follow up with that child as we're all conducting our criminal investigations to make sure that we're taking care of that child emotionally and physically on the back end as well. And then they will also be referred to medical services if they need a sexual assault medical exam. And those are done dependent on the type of exam needed. It can be done either at the hospital with an agency that is contracted through Safe Harbor, or actually there on site if it's an appropriate type of exam. So again, that child can get everything done. It's kind of a one-stop shop.
Well, and you brought up a great point as far as another thing in the past. So we went from the officer on scene trying to interview the person to let's put the person in jail. But there wasn't a whole lot of care for the child as far as recovery, as far as counseling, as far as that was a separate thing back then too. So I mean, all those things have sort of built. But now I know in one of the articles it talked about last year there were 2,322 children that were interviewed at Safe Harbor. And sometimes when people see that number, they're like, we had 2,300 kids that were sexually assaulted. Well, no. I mean, these are ones that are interviewed. It's not that large of a number, but it does take time. Those are still cases that we have to review. But that being said, one of the issues and that we face, and one of the reasons that when we see that number, it's not in the paper, right? We don't see all these cases because many times it's a family member. Many times it's someone that's associated with them that if we were to release that name, if we said, we put this person in jail, it links right to the child, right? So a question that I have, and Sergeant Hoff or Detective Espinosa could answer, that when it's a family member, so you have a stepfather or a father that is sexually assaulting a child, and they're not bringing them in for the interview. Okay, obviously they don't want to cooperate. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are options for that? I mean, what are you doing when someone who does not want to cooperate, you need that child there for this forensic interview, but you may not have enough to get them out of the home yet, right?
What I try to do is I try to convince the parents. I try to convince the, hey, let's let grandma bring him in or her in. So I just try to do some convincing there and say, this child needs to be interviewed. We'll try to get CPS involved because CPS can go over there, pick them up. If there's not a safety plan already in place, mm-hmm. They'll pick them up. They'll bring the child there. Usually that works. Right. In a lot of ways that works a lot of the times. There's sometimes though the parents say we're just not going to do it. Then we have to walk over to Miss Stewart's office and say, what do you think? Can you read this over? Can you tell me if there's enough there for us to say, hey, there's something going on here we have to investigate. And then they'll say we might have to subpoena those people and bring them up there.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I mean, and you're right. I mean, obviously, consent is great, if we can get it, but obviously there's legal processes going through. Now, you as a prosecutor having detectives across the hall, and y'all as detectives having prosecutors across the hall, that's not something normal in cases, that's right? So obviously, and it's something definitely every investigator needs to learn and know, is that we both have similar but different roles. Mm-hmm. And so where we're over here searching for probable cause and we're trying to get enough to prove this person, then there's so many things in between to get the beyond the reasonable doubt that you need. Yeah. And it's things that, again, cops don't think of because they're not going to sit in trial. They're not going to be the ones standing up arguing these things. And so I know until you're an experienced investigator, wrapping your head around, well, I have enough, right? I've done everything. I have this. And for you to say, no, I still need all these. And one thing that comes to mind with these type of cases is school records, right? Because school records by themselves don't prove sexual assault, right? But what do they lend to? Because you bring them in just about all these cases.
Well, a lot of times the school records can tell whenever a child, if abuse has started, maybe their grades have slipped, maybe they have been getting in trouble at school, and that could corroborate some of the stuff that they are, that corroborates possibly maybe abuse is going on. So that's one big reason about bringing in school records.
So now, as far as the, I guess, some cases that y'all have had, and what are they? I mean, obviously, y'all been doing this a while now. Some benefits that you've seen, and you talk about slipping through the cracks, and y'all have, and we refer to the multidisciplinary team, but y'all have meetings. Was it every 2 weeks?
Weekly now.
Weekly, okay.
Yeah, weekly now.
So sort of give me an idea of what's the purpose and what happens at those to make sure everything's addressed, right?
Well, during the MDT meeting, well, right now it's on Zoom because of the pandemic, but usually we all meet together, and it's the prosecutors, CPS, forensic interviewers, and all law enforcement, and we will go over basically each case that's active at that point and the interviews that have been done, and we will go over maybe some ideas or something that something else needs to be done for the care of the child or for the case itself. So it's really good to be able to share ideas and bounce ideas off each other during the MDT meetings. They're very important.
So is there some type of, I guess, checklist, for lack of a better term, that everything has been touched on this case? That, I mean, what's the point that we say this is going away, whether it's prosecutorial or we don't have enough?
Yeah.
And a lot of times also having them right across the hall from us is huge. It's not just necessarily the MDT meetings, but we'll go and sit down with Lisa Stewart, who's in there, and Shanna used to be in there, and bounce a case off of them, and that they work right along with us, and they may get to a point where, hey, you know what, it's ready to be submitted to the district attorney's office for prosecution. So I think that's a huge benefit of having the team there on site.
The MDT meeting is good. Excuse me.
No, go ahead.
The MDT meeting is good for me because I get to meet some of the Texas F&E people or some of the CPS workers that they may have a little bit more turnover than we do. Yeah. So when I get to meet those people, I'm like, okay, I put a face to the name, and then I'll reach out to them afterwards and say, hey, I have a case, and I have you on my Rolodex, but I don't know who you are. And so it builds those relationships with people that you normally wouldn't. And those Zoom meetings, that's what I get out of them.
That's correct.
Well, and you talked about the F&E, and that's something that's, I say sort of recent. I guess it's probably been about a year or so we've been doing it. So normally in the past we thought of forensic nursing being just sane kids, right? And now we have it with family violence, and we have it with child abuse. So I know we had a long time that we were having to find hospitals with certified people, and did we go to the right hospital, and all those type of things. So we sort of, I say, solve that problem. We definitely have a great work relationship. Tell me how that works now with the F&E type of thing, the contracts that we've done.
Well, I think that we have a online web-based program that you put the information in. They'll put the information in once they get it, but it's twice a week. It's Wednesday and Friday that they told us those are the days that they want to do it. And they have, for the acute and the non-acute, and one of the ladies did tell me one day, I went in there and I told her I had a case, and she said, well, it's 120 hours now. And I was still on the different, 90 hours, but she corrected me, and we started laughing about it. But they have a lot of good information, and they are always available. Mm-hmm. When you call them, they pick up their phone. Right. So it's pretty impressive that if I call anybody on the MDT team, they answer me. And that is crucial because so much of that red tape that sometimes you have in other aspects of law enforcement, I'm sure y'all do too, is just cutting through that. Hey, I called you, I left you a message.
Well, it's having those networks. It's having those people that you talk to. It's different than me trying to get in touch with a detective versus I need to call Todd, right? Because I know who that is, right? We already have that relationship. I have his cell phone. We have those conversations, right? So, and I think that sort of built off of that. So, Shanna sort of walked through with the child as a detective. What y'all's walked through, whether it's sharing a case that you've worked. I mean, tell me sort of y'all's process and how y'all are involved in this process.
Well, how it works with the sheriff's office and also any law enforcement, if a report comes in, whether it's through CPS or through like someone filing a report with our patrol division, it'll be now we work at the sheriff's office over at co-located at Safe Harbor. We handle
Right.
victims that are ages 13 years of age and younger, and we handle sexual abuse and serious bodily injury cases. So if a case is filed and it meets those requirements, then it is referred over to myself. I'm the supervisor there, and then it'll be assigned to a detective. And at that point, the way it works is the detective will be in contact with the family within very short period of time to set up a forensic interview. And the forensic interview is done at Children's Safe Harbor, and that is the building blocks of the case. That's the first thing that's done. And after the forensic interview, like Shanna talked about, that's when the whole process gets started. But after the forensic interview is done, our detective will meet with the family and talk about the interview and talk about the process. That's what we usually do. And then from then on, that's when the investigation starts. An investigation could last a week, or it could last multiple years potentially.
Right.
Because we see a lot of times that disclosure is a process. It really is that a child goes through. And sometimes they may not come forward and tell you everything that's going on. And then also you may have other victims that may come forward too. So the investigation is ongoing for years potentially.
Well, and that also explains why we have so many interviews, because you have an example of cases that I've overseen where we have a softball coach, right? And so we have one victim that's come forward, but there's a team of girls, right? And now we need to talk to everybody, how long has this been going on? Who's he had interaction with? All those type of things. And I think that having that strong team that y'all have helps against, and I've talked about as far as accountability in these things. One of the things I've seen whenever I've researched why these cases have failed, and I don't mean failed like that, that they went to court. I mean, like they never saw court, like they never saw the cop, right? And it always, I say amazed, bothered me, whatever, that some cases would be 4 to 5 years old and never worked. And I think it goes back to what you say, is that when people call, they don't know how long our job takes, right? So when it's been 2 years, they just assume we've been working on it, right? And so, yeah, to have those meetings, to know, hey, where are we at on this, to have people review it, and certainly, again, goes back to that training and expertise in that area, right? To know that this shouldn't be closed yet, because I know many come across our desks that are, they've written it off. The kid didn't make an outcry, and that was it, right? So, and sometimes that is it, but other times it's that disclosure that you're talking about that takes a little while, right? And Todd, I know you had a case you presented on, just to give an idea of the type of case we worked, if you want to touch on that particular case.
The case that we're talking about, it was a case I worked back in 2011 when I was at Children's Safe Harbor the first time. I worked there 10 years ago for 4 years and then transferred on. Then I recently went back. But it was a case I worked on a defendant that was convicted, and he received a life sentence of sexually abusing 2 of his stepdaughters. One was 8 and one was 9 years old. It was a very disturbing case, but with the help of the team at Safe Harbor, without that help, we couldn't have got that resolution. There's no way. We had, obviously, myself, my partner at the time, the forensic interviewer, the whole process. I mean, the therapy that the children received, and they received this therapy for years afterwards. And CPS, all of us worked together to come together for these 2 children, and the resolution was he was sentenced to life. And it was a pretty long case. We worked it for, I think it was about 6 months, and and it was pretty in depth and
How did
pretty
the case
disturbing.
come to light?
The initial outcry was made by a note that the 9-year-old wrote to her mother, and when the mother saw it, she contacted the law enforcement, the sheriff's office, and our patrol division went out to the scene and took the initial report, did a fabulous job on scene, and again, if it wasn't for their good work, it's very possible this case would not have had the resolution that it did. Collected some evidence on scene. Actually, the defendant, whenever the cops were initially called, he fled the scene and actually fled back up to Connecticut, where he was from. And once the children were brought in, a couple days later, I had them come in for a forensic interview. A sexual assault exam was done immediately on them. There was some evidence found during the sexual assault exam, and after the forensic interviews were done, we were able to secure an arrest warrant immediately on him. And with the help of the state police up in Connecticut, he was arrested. He tried to fight extradition because I remember him saying that he didn't want to come to Texas. He thought he was going to be put to death.
Right.
And so he was extradited down here to Texas, and a lot of things happened during the course of that case. We found out that the mother was still talking with the defendant. She was kind of torn. We were able to secure all of his jail phone calls, which we used as evidence. And all that combined, he actually took a plea. He pled guilty to the aggravated sexual assault, 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault of a child, and accepted a life sentence.
So now, when you say she was torn, she was torn as to believing him or the child, or she was torn as to she believed the child and wanted to stay with him anyway?
What we gathered was she was still in love with him, and she did believe her 2 daughters, but she was pretty torn in. He groomed her. That's what we call it. I mean, and that's what a lot of these defendants, what they do. They'll groom the child. They'll groom the family, and that's what he did. And we were able to secure a lot of evidence showing that. The jail phone calls, a lot of stuff that we found on computers and search warrants that we did on his property. Because when he fled, he left all his personal property behind. So we were able to search all that. We found some disturbing images. And all that combined, like I said, it was a very solid case. And for someone to take a plea and accept a life sentence, I'm sure Shanna can agree with this, that's very unusual. But that's what we did in this case.
You know, I find it more common, and certainly you know better than I do, I would find it more common in these cases than like in violent crime, like in homicide and one of those where it's like life or this, because they don't want that story.
That's right.
Right. You know, they don't want to actually have all this. They don't want the photos to come out, and they don't want the sex toys to come out. They don't want all the things to be thrown up and them have all this in the public. They'd rather just go away for the rest of their life. Right. I mean, I see that here more than in the violent stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, those big sentences like that are a testament to the investigation, and really they're a testament to an example of kind of what we're all talking about. And whenever we're able to, there's so much information to be had, right? And there's so much information to be found, but it's not easy. I mean, our offenders, by nature of being a child abuse offender, whether it's sexual abuse or physical abuse, which is all handled at Children's Safe Harbor, child fatality. First of all, they have to have access to that child. Second of all, often it's somebody that the child knows or their family members trust. And it's very, very hard for a child to tell. It's hard emotionally, and sometimes it's just not safe to tell, right? It's safer just to sit in it and endure it. And so, the statute allows for this multidisciplinary team. The law allows for it. And what we've really just tried to do is tap into, we're going to get every ounce of what the law allows for us to do. And so we've had the buy-in from law enforcement within the county, from the DA's office, from CPS, and we just really dive into that model. And so kind of like Detective Espinosa was saying, I could list examples all day of times that I've been out on a severe child physical abuse scene or out on a child sexual abuse scene, and I'm like, hey, that guy's name came up, or these kids, I recognize their name, and we've talked about them before, and then you're like, I know this worker. I know the worker who worked it. Hey, tell me what you know. Tell me what they're telling you. And when you're just getting that real-time information, so if a suspect starts lying to you, you can check what they told another agency. If a suspect starts, commits an offense, and something that we know now that we probably wouldn't have known 10 years ago, and you can probably speak to this, Todd, right? Almost in real time, we can say, hey, they have 3 CPS reports, not reported to law enforcement, that are exactly like this new case that our detective's working. And all of a sudden you have an MO. And so it is just such a, robust kind of area of information and sharing that information that really allows for, when I think about, gathering evidence in a child abuse case, is, we're going to have this kiddo and they're going to give us a forensic interview, and that's our roadmap, right? That's where we start. And then any piece of information that we can find to corroborate that child, it is just a weight off their shoulders, right? I've done it, but it's so hard to put a child on the stand and, man, everything rests on them. And they're just carrying so much of a burden for a child. So anything we can find, like school records, like digital evidence, like, prior offenses, man, that's just lifting that burden off their shoulders. So when they get up and testify, we can say, look, your words matters, but look at all this other stuff that we have to surround you. And, just to decrease that anxiety, decrease that burden on that child who's already been through so much. And so it's just really, the way our MDT team works, and, watching it I was our physical abuse and child fatality prosecutor at Safe Harbor. I've done child sexual abuse cases, and, now being in kind of a supervisory position and watching all of our team members work, I don't know that there's anybody that does it better as far as the MDT. And again, Safe Harbor just really, they coordinate that. They're the heart of that. And the way we share information and the amount of information in which we share, it is just a complete night and day difference from, if we weren't doing that, if we were siloed off within our own agencies, and it makes all the difference.
I mean, even just 10 years. I started in 2010 over there, and how much Children's Safe Harbor has grown, since then. Back then there was only 2 investigators there, and then 2 investigators from Conroe Police Department. We had 1 prosecutor, and that was it. And obviously CPS was there too, and we had 2 forensic interviewers. Now we have 5 detectives from the sheriff's office, a sergeant. We have 2 from Precinct 3, and we've also have 2 from Conroe PD, and we have 3 prosecutors and a victim's advocate there too.
And 2 DA investigators.
And 2 DA district attorney investigators. So you just see how much it's grown, and how we work together is truly amazing. And the team that we have there now, like Shanna said, is, you can't ask for a better team. I know the group of investigators I work with, they're amazing. They really are.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many times where Sergeant and we have these cases, and they're like similar, or they might be the same case, and we are one door over. So I go over there and I said, "Are you working this?" And he said, "Yeah, I was just looking at it." And either I've already opened it or he's already opened it, and then nothing falls through the crack.
Yeah.
As little as possible.
Yeah.
Because that's where those are the ones that really hurt everybody, is the ones that do fall through the cracks. And
Sure.
and we try to make sure that doesn't happen.
Because the way what he's speaking about is like a CPS intake will come in, and we all review the CPS intakes, and that's
it takes us all. There's a lot of them.
And there
takes
are a
all of
lot
us.
of them. So a lot of times him and I and Jessica Espinosa will talk with each other, and we'll know, like, if
Epperson.
Epperson.
You're
I'm sorry.
looking at
I
us.
apologize.
If my wife is watching this, I'm sorry.
I apologize about that. But we will talk with each other about, to make sure that you're handling it or we're handling it.
And that's been a big change, right? So the statute, again, it requires CPS to notify law enforcement when they get an intake report. But historically, that's looked like kind of, mass, faxes or emails with no procedure for anybody to put eyes on those. And so I was surprised whenever, we really invested, about 5 years ago into saying, give them to us. Like, not only give them to us, but an agency leadership has bought in and supported us in saying, this is, right, volume is a matter of how hard you're looking. Child abuse is an epidemic, and it's, it's not something that if numbers are low, it's because you're not looking. And so when we start looking at these CPS reports, and again, I'm so grateful for our partner agencies from the Sheriff's Department and Precinct 3 and Conroe and outside agencies and Safe Harbor and CPS, and saying, okay, we're going to set up a system that detectives put eyes on these, prosecutors put eyes on these. And I personally have tried more than one case where it initiated as nothing more than a CPS intake report. Law enforcement had not been called, right? But it was a flat crime. I mean, and we have had defendants who we have taken all the way to trial and sentencing hearings who have been maxed out. And the way that started is we got an intake report. A detective said, I will take that. I'm going to work that because that is a crime. Proved it, and then we take it to trial, and it's something that would have never ever made it to prosecution.
That's right. It would slip through the cracks.
It would have slipped through the cracks, and I've had ones that even if say law enforcement gets called, but then we're getting that CPS intake report concurrently. Sometimes we get it before law enforcement's even called. It gives us a jump, and I've been on a scene on a near fatality of a child, and we're listening to what happened, and we're listening to the injuries on these children. I was out with the sheriff's department, actually, with the majors detectives, because we thought this child was going to die. And as we're standing there, the defendant's name comes up, and we had recently reviewed an intake report from 2 prior children that he hurt the exact same way. And so that day on scene, we were able to call the parties that worked that case. They came out, and all of a
Right.
sudden we have all this information, and he went to trial and he got a life sentence. And so, all of a sudden he couldn't say, I have no idea what happened anymore, because 2 other kids who were in his care had been hurt in not as severely, but in very similar ways. And when he starts lying to detectives, they have something to put in front of them.
And that couldn't have been done without a team
Couldn't have
working
been
together. And there's employees at Children's Safe Harbor. There's actually 5 of them that are assigned to review CPS intake cases. And we work hand in hand with them every single day, and they're amazing. Myra Delmay's team. And so they will also review them, and they will know which agency, because it's jurisdictional thing. Is it the Conroe Police
Right.
Department? Is it Precinct 3? Is it the Sheriff's Office? So they will know kind of where it goes and everything, but they're truly amazing. So there's eyes everywhere looking at these CPS intake cases,
By
because
design.
like Shanna says, there's a lot of cases that come from there.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is that system only in this area? Because I've never seen
Well,
it.
Yeah.
I
It's
can tell
fairly
you it.
new.
Yeah, well, and I can tell you sort of the beginning of it, because I was still over majors and stuff when that happened. Is CPS called us, and they wanted to have the meeting. They wanted to say, hey, we'd like you to start looking at some of these reports, this, that, and other. And I remember me and my sergeant sitting down with them and saying, yeah, sure, it's no big deal. We said, we're getting them. And they said, oh, okay, great. And they were talking about like a team looking at them and everything. We're like, we get like 2 or 3 a month. And they're like, what do you mean? Says, we're sending y'all hundreds.
Yeah.
And we
That's
said,
how much it is.
no, we get them on the fax. There's like 2 or 3 come in a month.
Yeah.
They didn't have the right email. They didn't have the right stuff. So
Yeah.
again, but that wasn't being done. That we weren't. That was the start of it as far as looking. And I know now there's hundreds, if not up to 1,000 a month or so coming in that are dividing, But you also brought up a great point. I think we see it nationwide as far as our victims that are out there, that when you don't have that forensic evidence, when you have their story and you have that MO, right? They do something the same way over and over and over because that's what worked, right? And again, we see that nationwide and in all of these cases that one person comes forward and they're questioned, right? Is that true? But then you have another person who is not related in any way. They don't know anything, but they can tell the same exact story about this person, and then another person. And that's what we find with, a lot of times, like I mentioned earlier, the softball, okay? Or when we're dealing with a leader of that type of thing, right? Where they have access to multiple children over years. And again, one person was afraid to come forward. They finally did. And now you have all these people. And it's not the fact that, they said they wanted more people and this person just wants attention. I mean, they can tell the story. They can tell things that you should not know
That's right.
that happened to you, and again, you can corroborate things. And it's very powerful to say,
And it used to be that MO report that you could get from somebody else would take you weeks to get.
Right.
I mean,
if you ever got it.
You'd be working another case or doing something else, and somebody would call you out of the blue and say, you still need this? I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But now it's almost like real time. I mean, within 5-10 minutes, somebody's calling you, or somebody's on that spreadsheet saying, hey, they're previous here, Sam MO. So it's just so much faster and more efficient. And I don't know why other places don't do.
Yeah, and to answer your question, it's statutory, it's required, it's allowed by law, the communication is allowed by law. I think it was just setting up those systems where there were the personnel and the organizational capacity to do it. And so, whenever our agency said, we're going to buy into this, let's look
it still required time. It still required personnel and something to come up with.
It continues to, and you have to have that buy-in from agency leadership, from the community. Because, just to give you a sense of the scope, right, there are 5 full-time employees whose entire job is to review CPS intake reports, coordinate those cases, coordinate getting law enforcement assigned, and it is vital. It is just, I always say, communication is key, right? Whenever safe adults and our systems that we have in place to protect children and to seek justice for children, when we're not communicating, perpetrators are winning and kids are losing.
That's right.
Because, the second we get siloed off, that's an easy button for a perpetrator, right? I can tell CPS one thing, I can tell the detective something totally different because nobody's going to check. And that's when kids lose, and that's when kids are in even more danger than what they already are. And so just that level of communication, and, I've said it, but I mean, just CPS is kind of at the heart of that, and they're pushing that, and they're pulling people together, and they're coordinating us. And, if I have a case that I have pending, and I'm prosecuting it in the DA's office, and a new one comes in, and Detective Espinosa gets assigned, and there's a new caseworker, they're going to pull us all together, and they're going to say, okay, here's what we have. Here, everybody, here's all your information. Here's the facts of the case. Here's how you get a hold of your people, and here's who's assigned to what. And all of a sudden, we're getting real-time
And just
information.
getting like staffing cases with Texas children, and Brittany's there to help me because
Yeah.
I don't understand half the things that they're talking
Brittany's our
about.
child physical abuse
Right,
prosecutor.
so she's fantastic in those meetings because she knows all those technical terms.
That's right.
That I would be lost.
She's practically a doctor at this point.
Right. and I just say, so was the head messed up? But she's like, yes, but she got me on one of those.
Yeah.
And it was a great interview that I had with those people because they were asking me questions. They were telling me things that I'd never even heard of, and it helped me.
Yeah.
It helped me understand the case. It helped me understand where Brittany's side was coming from. This is why we need this.
Yeah.
That's the important thing for a detective.
And Todd talked about it growing. I mean, I've been a part of it many years, and we've watched more detectives, and those type of things. And the sad part is you're not bored, right?
No.
Y'all,
That's
right.
y'all are sitting around
Very
because we
busy.
added more people, right? So, and we could even use more in that area.
Absolutely.
And it was something that always, because I ran stats on in the past, whatever, and at least in our county, and I would probably assume in most counties, because of the thing we talked about before, where usually it's a family member, usually it's someone that we don't publicize type of thing, right? I know at the point I was running them, the crimes against children was 3 times the amount of any other violent crimes in the county.
I believe it.
So I mean, and I think that's sadly, I think probably common,
Yeah.
right? When you look across it, because again, they're the easiest victims because they don't fight back. They don't have, the adult, ability to get away, to have the resources to do those things, right? And I don't believe that it's increasing. I think it was always there, right? We're just now having the resources, and
To look for it.
I think.
More awareness too, I think.
So I mean that brings up another point that we're talking about as far as growing, and I know in the recent article that was just put out on building a new center, right? Because the current center that we're in is many years old, and it's maxed out. I mean, my understanding, there's not another room. I mean, there's
We're out
no.
of
We've had to bring in temporary office space. A few years
Yes.
back, our office had to bring in
The
essentially
counseling
turn it-
services had to move.
Counseling services had to move. We had to bring in temporary office, kind of break down cubicles to accommodate more detectives. We have prosecutors, detectives sharing offices. It's
And also
they're
another thing,
stacked.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's getting more difficult to schedule forensic interviews.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you run
There's
out of
only a certain
room,
number
you're
of rooms.
yeah.
No, I'm saying
Yeah.
that but also the people and the time, but you call and there's so many cases, so many kids coming through there
Yeah.
that you call and they're like, we're booked for 2 weeks.
And I mean, I think that speaks to it as far as y'all have a great plan. Y'all have a great investigative team and all the knowledge in the world, right? But if you only have so many people and, making up numbers here, but you can handle 100 cases a month, but the county's producing 200,
Right.
what do you do, right? I mean, 100 are falling through the crack, not by any means of what you're doing, but by the lack of, and I don't even want to say resources, because even if we threw more deputies, where are we putting them? Where you can get a forensic interview, you take them out to the car now. I mean,
Right.
it's it,
Space is.
so I know that the most recent update, and I know being on board, you can speak to this. I know they're planning on a new facility.
Yes.
They purchased land, or they have land, or
They purchased land in Conroe. So there's land purchase, and there are building plans. It's ready to go. There's an architecture company that's completed all of the plans. It's just a matter of raising the funds to break ground. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about children's safe harbor. So a lot of people don't know, and it might come as a surprise to some, right? Children's Safe Harbor is a nonprofit. And so although they work hand in hand with state agencies, CPS, law enforcement agencies, governmental entities, they're not one. They rely upon grants, upon, private donation funding. They're a nonprofit. And so they're not,
It is not a government
it's not
entity.
a government entity,
So,
even though they're performing a.
so basically, if they did not exist, or there is not a county, and I'm going to speak for the county because that's where we're at, that's where we all work. There is not a county entity that does this. Like if they went
That's right.
away, there's not a place that is providing, it's not like we've chosen them
That's correct.
and not built our own.
Correct.
They're the only ones.
Is it common? I mean, like around the state, like Dallas CAC, or are they part of the city, or are they also a nonprofit? Do you know?
I'm sure it varies by jurisdiction as to, what that looks like. There is some, just like other nonprofits in the county, and I won't speak for, other counties or even our county government, but there is some funding to be provided to nonprofits, but they fall in that category. They fall in the nonprofit, whereas, our offices are fully funded. We're government
Right.
entities. Every
You need
year,
cops out there, you need
get funding.
DAs, so
Right.
there are
They fall
tax
into
dollars
the
that go.
nonprofit category.
Right.
And our county and, our bosses, our elected officials are incredibly supportive of the
Absolutely.
work, but that
And not to
doesn't change the fact
dismiss-
that their funding source is different than ours.
Right,
It's
and it
just,
doesn't dismiss, I mean, we're not saying like I know our county commissioners, there is money allotted from our county budget
Right.
to Safe Harbor.
Yes.
But it is not completely funded by the county. The county is not building the building. I'm not sure if they're putting money towards it. I don't know that
don't
part of the
either.
budget part, but I do know that currently, it's a $10 million project.
Right.
They've raised $3 million so far for the new building. I know in the article that I read just this weekend in the Courier was that funding slowed down over
Pandemic.
pandemic. Obviously, again, if you're asking for donations, many of those people who ask for donations are businesses that obviously they fell on hard times
Yeah.
during COVID. So there's those issues. Then again, just being able to go out and meet, and it's very hard to explain to someone who you're asking for millions of dollars
Sure.
what you do over a phone call, without them coming and visiting, without them seeing those type of things, right? And how long has the new process been going on? I remember it was a few years back that we were talking architecture and whatever, and I
Yeah.
know that's gone.
Right. I think the hope would have been that, we would have broken ground. Obviously, COVID, greatly impacted that. But I mean, I think the hope is as soon as possible. I mean, it is a desperate need for space. And so as soon as that funding is able to be raised, the leadership team at Children's Safe Harbor is ready to break ground. They have all the plans they need. It's just a matter of funding. And so that's what that looks like. And so they're in a capital campaign currently. It's been ongoing. It will continue, specifically for funding for the facility, which is different than their funding for their operational costs. But the capital campaign is specifically for facilities funding.
And we talk about Montgomery County because that's where we all work and our experience stuff, but Safe Harbor does not just serve
correct.
Montgomery
Correct.
County. So what all counties are involved
Yeah.
in their
San
process?
Jacinto and Walker County
Right.
also.
So we're by far the largest county, and we're the primary county they serve, but it's a regional CAC. And so those smaller counties, San Jacinto and Walker specifically, also feed into Montgomery County's, Children's Safe Harbor's client base.
Right, so they don't have their own there, they
don't
come
have one.
here
They
for
come
their, so, and the closest one beyond here would be Harris County.
Harris.
And Houston.
Which is the third largest county in the nation, who
Yes.
has their own,
Incredibly busy.
Yes.
it's
It's
not like
huge.
they have other places you
Right.
can
So imagine
go.
that difference, right? You have the difference between a child being able to come in and be scheduled nearly immediately within our county with law enforcement from our county and counseling in our county and advocacy in our county and law enforcement and CPS all on scene from our county would be putting kids in a car traveling an hour and a half to a CAC in a place that they've maybe never been in downtown Houston. I mean, that is the next closest option. And a CAC that has every bit of work that they can handle down there as
Right,
well. So.
yeah, it's not like they're calling you saying they're bored, you got
No,
anything for them
no,
to
sir.
do?
No, they're
Right.
not
Yeah.
by any stretch.
And I know that Dallas was a model we looked at. Again, going back to the Crimes Against Children Conference, was just, again, an amazing conference covering all aspects of what y'all do, prosecutors, forensic interviewers, just everybody in one place.
And we have some of our local cases being highlighted at that conference. So we have personnel
year,
that are highly
2
trained
of
this
them.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that you've presented there before.
Yes.
I mean, so it's learning from other people's work. It's learning from other people's mistakes.
Yep.
It's learning from the models that y'all are putting together. So yeah, that's great work there. But they, I know, had a more newer center, I guess, that we had looked at. How many, or do we know how many, I guess, investigators, how could we grow? I mean, like, if we were to build this, like we have this 10 million facility, what are we having? How many more investigators, prosecutors, what can
Yeah.
we put in it?
I don't know specific numbers for like office space, but it would be more than ample space for more than the investigators and detectives and prosecutors that we have now with space to grow. In addition to that, the plan is to initially get phase 1 built. That's to get everybody over to that site. But there is space on that land site for a phase 2 building, which would allow for even further growth. And so, again, the land is purchased, the plans are drawn up. The first phase will be to get that first building, which will already far and away outpace what our MDT members are in now. And then once they're there and established, there's already plans for the phase 2, which will be just additional building space and allow us to kind of section off counseling and law enforcement and things like that as appropriate. And it would put everybody in the same building.
That's right.
Have they considered like ample room for growth?
Plenty, yes. It's a huge, I think it's a 17-acre tract, if I don't remember
wow.
right, is what they bought.
We
So
just
it's
need a few more Spanish speakers.
There you go.
'Cause
Are
they
you saying that
use me
you're staying busy?
They use
Robert?
me a lot up there, but I'm glad to do it. So
Yeah.
Well, and that's something that I've found a fault of some people when they build is it's like we think about the now. What do we
Yeah.
need right
That's right.
now? And I think it's put us in some of the situations that we've gotten into is that was great then and it met like the need
Yeah.
then, but now the county's grown
Yeah.
and these things have
I
happened.
mean, you
and-
think about how much the county's grown since 2009 when we moved into that facility that we're
Yep.
in now. And it's 2021 now, and
And I have no doubt we walked in
we're
2009, we were
outgrown.
like, oh, this is
Yeah,
awesome.
that's
We
right.
got plenty of space.
because we had that small house on Lewis Street before.
Yeah.
And we went to what we have now. It was
Yeah,
huge, but
it's
now
we had conference space. We had
it's I can't stress enough how important it is to get that new building and get the space because the county's growing. You know, I mean, it's one of the
Some of
fastest
the
growing
fastest
counties in the state, and the more people that come in, the more cases we're going to have, and therefore the more investigators, the more
Yeah.
prosecutors we're going to need, more CPS, and to keep the team together and working as a team, we're going to need the space.
Yep.
So do you see, I mean, besides space, do you see something else that would benefit the team? Something that you think is either missing, so, I mean, maybe not another entity, but what do you think could be brought that would, it's sort of like we're always looking for like the next
Yeah.
thing, the next level, where could we take it to?
Man, the infrastructure is in place. I can't speak highly enough of the model that we have set up and the amount of communication that's shared. We always need, the space is a big one, and that's going to be something that Children's Safe Harbor is pushing in their fundraising campaign on the nonprofit side. And then, again, we have incredibly supportive elected officials. I mean, we care about kids in Montgomery County.
Oh, yeah.
And so just always having an eye towards the need for resources, the need for specialized folks who are able to investigate and prosecute and care for abused children in our county. Because as long as we're looking, and the more we're looking, we're going to find it. It's just a matter of how many eyes we can afford to have looking. And so just always having an eye for the models in place, the structures in place, and it is fine-tuned, and we have the relationships that when issues come up, we can work through them. But it's always a matter of personnel, space and personnel.
And I know sometimes there's a different thought process, and if we can speak to, I know you started a project this past year with the schools.
Yes.
So just some insight, and again, it's
Yeah.
that what am I thinking? The
Kind of that missing
just a
piece.
notice, right? Just another person to
Yeah.
have eyes on. So
Yeah, that's something that we started with the schools. We piloted it this past fall. I would say they fall outside of our traditional MDT, but that teachers are our highest mandated reporters. They're high. We get most of our mandatory reports from teachers. What we saw and was scary during the pandemic is reports went down because these kids were isolated with no safe adults. They get back in school and they go back up, and so unfortunately, teachers often come in and they don't have any information. A child might come to school in the morning and look tired or maybe act out in class, and they don't know that dad got arrested for beating up mom in front of them the night before. And so this is a program that I'm proud to say every constable in the county is on board, Conroe PD, the sheriff's office, and every school district in the county, public school district, and we're continuing to onboard other agencies or city agencies involved, just where law enforcement's able to give a confidential notification to the school, no information about the case. All it says is just a handle with care notification. No details, no personal information, just giving that school district a heads up, handle this child with care, and kind of bringing in that last large entity of safe eyes on kiddos. Maybe if a child shows up and is struggling that day, it's not treated as a disciplinary issue. It's treated in a trauma-informed way. And I'll emphasize, no case information is provided, no personal information is provided, no details at all, just handle with care. And the schools are trained on the back end to understand that just means this child needs a little extra love and attention, and then they stand ready to provide that.
And so I know that you launched this, you were behind this for Montgomery County, and so as far as someone listening that thinks this may be beneficial to the community, your steps were to, I guess, which path did you take? Was it I talked to law enforcement first, or then I went to the schools first?
Yeah, and I want to give credit to Brittany Hansford, our child physical abuse prosecutor. She brought this to me, and it's her baby. But we got with some of our core multidisciplinary team members, and had kind of a planning committee, as well as CASA Child Advocates of Montgomery County, and then Children's Safe Harbor, some representatives from our MDT. And we just started checking in with schools to assess the need for information. And then we went to the agency leadership and got buy-in there. And we set up the entire structure of the plan. We had that set up in our in our planning committee, and then just started going to each agency, trying with the largest agencies first, MDT coordinated agencies first. And same thing with the schools were an easy yes. They're craving that information to take care of these kiddos. And we're completely understanding when we said we can't give you any information about anything that's happening, but we can tell you to handle them with care. And I was very happy that our law enforcement leadership was on board, and it's been piloted this school year, and we hope to continue growing it.
So what's been the response? It's been going out for a little while now.
Yeah, very positive. We're not the first jurisdiction in the state to do it. I think the first in Texas was San Antonio ISD, but it's nationwide. There's programs throughout the country. And so we had a model to start with. We kind of tweaked it for the needs of our county, for the, local, any requirements we had legally. But the hope is that we have every school, public and private, every law enforcement agency on board. Again, it's just safe adults communicating in any way that we can, legally and practically, to make sure that we're not losing kids to falling through the cracks.
Right, and we talked a great deal as far as CPS reports and how those come in, and I certainly want to take a moment with this being the month for awareness for child abuse and everything, what a person should do if they suspect child abuse, as far as if you think your neighbor, if you're a teacher, if that's where we get a majority of our cases, right? It's a concerned citizen, it's someone close to the child that's developed a trust that they feel confident in talking or whatever, but I mean, they make a report. And so a couple of avenues in Texas, and please add on if y'all know others. Certainly you can call the police, right? Everybody knows to call the police.
Absolutely.
But you can call CPS directly. They will create that report that is then forwarded to the police agency. And hopefully something's in place similar to in our county that someone's going to read this and get it to the right place. What are other things?
Well, like you talk about with CPS, and they will also set up forensic interviews also. We didn't talk about that earlier, where if they're working a case and then there's what we call a child at risk, where a child has not made a disclosure yet, but they are doing a CPS investigation, they will bring the child in for a forensic interview. And if a disclosure is made during the forensic interview, then our forensic interviewers at Children's Safe Harbor will make a police report, and an investigation is started at that point. So that's another avenue where an investigation could be started.
And sometimes the perpetrator is a victim as well.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And we have rules in place that you can't bring a perpetrator into Safe Harbor. But if it's found that there's no disclosure from that other child, then we'll bring that first child in, the one that's a perpetrator,
the
but he's a
juvenile
victim.
offender.
Right.
A juvenile offender, excuse me. But he or she is probably a victim as well.
Yeah.
And so that's how another one doesn't fall through the crack. That's the most important thing. And Safe Harbor stays on top of us with that. And
Absolutely.
They let us know, hey, this is what's going on with this kid. This is what we need. Can y'all do it? Absolutely.
Yep.
And my agency, I can't speak for your agency, but I'm pretty sure it's close or the same. They've never told me not to open up a case.
No, everybody on the team is. I mean, we always praise the job that Montgomery County does in protecting our children, and appreciate all that y'all do. Appreciate y'all coming in today to talk about this and share that information. And certainly, one of the big things I certainly want to end with is we need to grow. We want to keep taking care of our kids. We want to keep being there for them, providing the investigations that are needed. There are going to be fundraising opportunities. A contact at Safe Harbor, you have the email or?
Yeah, if you look for Children's Safe Harbor, Conroe, Texas, Google that, you can pull up their page. They have an events page, they have their direct contact and their email. I believe there's a donor page. And so if you look for them, you can also follow them on Facebook. All of their current events are coming up, fundraising opportunities, so I'd encourage you to engage with them both at their website and on social media.
So we appreciate it, and thank y'all for listening. And we are going to be having some other shows coming up, so please tune in again. Again, thank our sponsor, Planet Forward, and our Lone Star Radio for supporting us, and we look forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you.